The views expressed on the Final Straw Radio do not necessarily reflect those of Asheville FM, Friends of Community Radio, or any of the affiliate radio stations airing the show. Airing first on Asheville FM, WSFM LP at 103.3 FM in Asheville, North Carolina, this is The Final Straw, and I'm William Goodenough. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. Also, if you're interested in rebroadcasting any episode or segment of the show, you're free to do so. Just send us an email if you end up using any content. You can find radio-friendly versions of this show of 59 minutes in length by visiting archive.org and searching for the collection called The Final Straw.
If you care to write us, you can send us letters at our new address, The Final Straw, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina, 28816.
As part of this May Day episode, I had the chance to speak with Nutty, who has been holding down a monopod blockade which is blocking the construction of the Mountain Valley Pipeline in the renamed Hellbender Autonomous Zone. She has been without the ability to re-up her food and water supplies for over 21 days due to cop and forest ranger interference. We got to speak about the monopod and her experiences participating in this struggle, as well as her views on resisting the MVP, some ideas on the future of this struggle, some actionable items, and direct asks for support. On the very first day of this blockade, as some listeners will remember, Nutty's direct support was arrested while trying to explain the rigging of the blockade to the police. Monopods rely on a series of rigs to support a platform where resistors typically sit. The Mountain Valley Pipeline, which is a massive 303-mile proposal by the company Dominion Resources in partnership with Duke Energy and Piedmont Natural Gas, is proposed to span land from northwestern West Virginia to southern Virginia and would disrupt and destroy countless habitats and complex interconnected water supplies, as well as the human communities it would likewise destroy. To hear an in-depth podcast about the issue, I recommend End of the Line, broadcasting out of Richmond, which you can find at pipelinepodcast.org and on soundcloud.com/pipelinepodcast. Our guest will mention in the interview that the MVP's proposal just got amended to go through a 70-mile stretch of North Carolina. For those who are concerned by this, I'd recommend looking into the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which would span a 600-mile tract of land over West Virginia, Virginia, and North Carolina. Opposition to this pipeline is already gaining steam, so keep an eye on your favorite news sources for updates on that. To donate to our guest, you can go to bit.ly/support MVP resistance, and to get in touch with them, you can write to Appalachians Against Pipelines at protonmail.com.
Next up is a conversation that I had with two community organizers from Sonoma County, California, named Sebastian and Mara. These two folks do organizing around immigrant communities and are helping to organize May Day festivities in Santa Rosa this year. Sebastian and Mara share about past years organizing around May Day, immigrant struggles against ICE, and community efforts in the follow-up to the devastating fires that raged through Northern California last year. Mara also shares about last year's workplace organizing initiatives of Sonoma County waste workers that won them a contract, agricultural workers who won a contract from Gallo Sonoma Vineyard, and current struggles of employees at the Hyatt Vineyard Creek in Santa Rosa. Sebastian also talks about the student walkouts he helped to organize on March 5th and plans for similar walkouts on May Day, alongside the, quote, Day Without an Immigrant, unquote. Finally, we'll hear from Jack and Quinn, two local to Asheville Wobblies, helping to plan a May Day rally and march here in Asheville, meeting at 4 p.m. and launching at 5 p.m. at Pritchard Park in downtown. Later that evening, Blue Ridge Anarchist Black Cross will be hosting a benefit concert at Fleetwood's on Haywood Road in West Asheville. The show starts at 8 p.m. and will feature the music of Poor Excuse, Wrecked, that's WRHCKD, Earth Collider, and Nomadic War Machine. And the monies will go to local efforts to release black mothers from the Buncombe County Jail via the Black Mama Bail Fund effort of May 10th. More info on the Black Mama bailout can be found at nomoremoneybail.org. There's no Sean Swain segment this week due to scheduling errors on our part, but don't worry, we promise to have him back on next week's episode. If you missed the sound of his voice, you can visit his website, seanswain.org, and easily find his segments going back to 2014. We are happy to announce that former Black Panther, BLA soldier, and elder Herman Bell walked free from prison this week. Here's a quote from his support crew. Quote, "On Friday, April 27th, Herman Bell, a 70-year-old respected elder, was released after serving nearly 45 years in prison. Herman was one of thousands of incarcerated older people who was repeatedly denied parole for over a decade after completing his minimum sentence. His release is a result of important and urgent changes in the criminal legal system and parole regulations that are a part of a nationwide efforts to end mass incarceration. Let us hope that Herman's release brings inspiration for more change. Herman is deeply humbled and grateful for the broad expressions of trust and support, but out of respect for the feelings of victims' families, he will not be making any public statements. We welcome him home." Unquote. And on behalf of The Final Straw, so do we. In other political prisoner news, Mumia Abu-Jamal has a court appearance Monday, April 30th, in Philadelphia, and his support crew is asking folks in the area to show up and pack the courthouse. Show up in courtroom attire to support Mumia at 8 a.m. at room 1108 at the Criminal Justice Center at 13th and Filbert Street in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. In this hearing, the judge will consider the argument that former PA Supreme Court Judge Castile should have recused himself from considering Mumia's appeal because Castile had been working in the Philly DA's office at the time of Mumia's prosecution and during later appeals. A similar situation was deemed unconstitutional in the U.S. Supreme Court case in 2016, Williams v. Pennsylvania. There's also a call for supporters of Mumia to call current Philly DA Larry Krasner and request the release of files on Mumia from the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office and Philadelphia Police Department. You can call Larry Krasner at 215-686-8000. That's 215-686-8000. More ideas on how to help out Mumia can be found at mobilizationformumia.com. That's the number 4, mobilizationformumia. I'd like to make a little statement of clarification from the Scott Crow interview. On last week's episode of our show, in which I interviewed Scott Crow about his new book, Setting Sights, I asked a question about toxic masculinity and gun culture, and included the term male socialized to describe men, and I misspoke. What I meant to communicate in the question was masculine expectation and performativity, and not to lump people who have been deemed male by society based on a doctor's childhood assessment. I should have said men. So sorry to misspeak, and thanks to the folks who gave me feedback.
The Final Straw is a proud member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts, and also here's a jingle from another member.
We are at war!
The Soulcast is a twice-a-month anarchist podcast hosted by North American rap artist Soul. It's a podcast about revolutionary politics from an anarchist perspective. Every month I interview academics, journalists, revolutionaries, quote-unquote activists, artists, musicians, and really anything that I find interesting. I never got to go to college, so this, I guess, is my cheat sheet. So anybody who wants to learn, you can learn with me. Subscribe in iTunes at tinyurl.com/Soulcast and check it out on the Channel Zero Podcast Network.
We are at war!
So perhaps we should just jump right into it. So first of all, thank you so much for making the time to come onto this radio show. Would you say your name and just say a little bit about yourself?
I'm currently going by Nutty, so you can still just use that. And yeah, I mean, as you'll probably make clear in some sort of introduction or something, I'm the person currently occupying the Monopod that's blocking MVP's access road on the mountain that was previously called Peters Mountain, and we've been calling the Hellbender Liberation Zone in honor of the resistance that has been happening here. And I don't know how many details about me are really relevant to what's happening here, other than that I just care enough about stopping this pipeline, like so many other people I know along this route, to try to be able to take the actions that I thought would make sense to get closer to that.
Definitely. Yeah, thanks for saying all of that stuff. So like you mentioned, we're here to talk about the Monopod blockade in the so-called Jefferson National Forest in opposition to the very infamous, at this point, Mountain Valley Pipeline. Will you describe the monopod you are on, and what is the rigging and construction like?
Well, a monopod is basically a pole, and in this case, it's a tree trunk. It could also be made out of other materials. People have made them out of other materials, but this is a tree trunk. I'm about 40 feet off of the road. There's 4 lines that run off of the top of it, so it's anchored in all 4 directions. One of the anchors runs down around 80 or 90 feet from the base, so the line running from the top is maybe around 100 feet long, and then splits, one deviation going to one corner of the gate, and then the end of the line actually running and being anchored to the pin that would need to be lifted in order to open the gate, which makes it really impossible to open the gate while that line is anchoring the monopods. There's 2 lines that are running to the sides of the roads, to 2 trees on the sides of the roads, and then there's a line that's running to a ground traverse along the anchor, again, to 2 trees on the side of the road, but running closer to the ground. And that anchor is split in a lot of different points. In case, people may have seen photos of this thing that looks like a spider web. It's split in such a way that if any of the individual terminations were messed with or were, cut in any way, then the rope would run through a steel link, because it's not knotted, it's just running through a steel link, and put a whole bunch of slack into that back anchor line, which would make things really dangerous up here.
Yeah, I've definitely seen photos of it, and it looks like a really effective blockade method.
Yeah.
I read on the Earth First Newswire that this may be the longest running monopod ever, and you yourself have been up there for 30 days as of yesterday. Is it 31 days today?
Yeah, 31 days now.
And recently 3 people were arrested attempting to bring you supplies. How are you holding up, and have you been able to get more supplies?
I mean, I haven't gotten any supplies for, I think, over 20 days now. But yeah, it was certainly disappointing and hard to see 3 friends get arrested for trying to bring stuff. But I've also still been holding up fairly well. I mean, I've been rationing food for long enough that even though I don't have that much food left, I can still eat a little bit every day. And we got a really big thunderstorm a while back, which let me collect a lot of water, and have been able to continue to collect rainwater. So physically, it could certainly be worse off. And like holding up otherwise, it's just been really amazing to be up here and to keep hearing updates from friends about how this resistance keeps spreading and how more people are getting excited and energized and taking action or thinking about taking more kinds of actions, and being able to watch that and being able to know that I'm playing some sort of concrete part in it. It's worth a lot more than being a bit hungry and a bit tired of not being able to walk around.
Yeah, it's been a super, people are looking to it, and I think feeling really, really inspired by what you're doing and what other folks are doing to resist the MVP right now. Can you talk about the reaction that cops or forest rangers have had to this particular monopod blockade?
Yeah, I mean, very unsurprisingly, they've been acting as agents of the pipeline company from the start. On the first day, a lot of police showed up. There was Forest Service, there were U.S. Marshals, there were state police, all, clearly trying to figure out some way to deal with this, because they were during the day saying that, I would be out of the pod that day, and that night they tried very initial sort of attempt at redirecting an anchor, but they never actually got an extraction crew in here. I think that is important to note, that definitely been trying to bring an end to this by doing supplies and making support a lot more difficult. They've stayed away from that certain kind of escalated confrontation. And so anyone planning anything anywhere else, keep that in mind, that there seems to be a pattern of sieges going on right now with regards to aerial blockade. But after the initial day of forcing a lot of people away, people were initially able to just drive up, park in the parking lot, rally outside the gate. It was great. Kids were able to come and play outside the gate. Older folks were able to come visit. And then, of course, they closed the entirety of the road and said people couldn't walk up on the road. The only people allowed on it are the pipeliners and the Forest Service. At that point, the encampment was still able to be off to the side, right off the road in a pop-up tent. So people would come over under the monopod and we just talk back and forth. It had a hand crank radio. They would just put it right underneath the monopod. But after I was able to, at that point, they were already saying no one can bring in food and water. So after I was able to receive resupply in a moment where there weren't very many cops nearby, then they imposed a closure of 125 feet from the center line of this road on either side, which both means that people, in order to hike up, have to hike up not in the road, but at least 125 feet away from it through a whole bunch of really rugged terrain, which people continue to do, which is really amazing, but it definitely makes coming to visit a lot harder, and obviously also made resupplies a lot harder. Early on, too, the state police arrested someone on a really bogus, reckless driving charge, basically because the MVP security asked them to. And there was also another point where someone was just entering the closure, not with the intention to resupply. They were actually just a Forest Service. I told them they'd give them a business card, and they were following them, being like, give me that business card. You said you were going to give it to me. And they're like, all right, you're in the closure, you're under arrest. So they're really taking this closure thing very seriously now. They're here 24 hours a day. They shine lights for surveillance, both at the monopod, and just recently they started running a generator to shine lights into the woods between me and the support camp. And they've been really clearly coordinating closely with MVP security. On the day that the 3 people were arrested trying to resupply, I could just see them, even not even just the Forest Service, the state police were just standing and talking for a really long time with one of the MVP security people. They have this fire set up underneath the monopod on the days before the security set up the tent up by the tree pits, and also on other days. So I just remember specifically security was coming out, hanging out around the fire. I can't hear much of what they're saying from up here, but I know that they're working closely together.
Yeah, for sure. And I was really struck by what you said about a pattern of sieges happening, which is maybe not at all that unsurprising state strategy for, we see it with prisons, we see it with, this kind of thing where they try to isolate sort of networks of support. So I think that was super apt, and thank you for talking about that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is what they're trying to do, and they're trying to contain this so that it just stays in this one specific area and is dependent on one person's abilities or supplies or determination, when it's really been collective actions and people working together that have been able to pull all of this stuff off and continue to support it, and what's going to make more things possible.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like you're getting some support, which is really cool. So that's that's heartening to hear, because it sounds like a super frightening situation to be in from where I'm sitting at the moment.
I mean, I've honestly been really lucky that way, because there's a public camp 125 feet away. I mean, people can continue to hike up. I encourage anyone who's listening who is anywhere nearby and wants to see what's going on to hike up to here and to hike up to the pits. Even though there's closures going on, people can still come and talk to each other and hang out and see what's going on outside of the closures and shout back and forth from here.
Hell yeah. So resistance to the MVP has been going on for quite a number of years now. What do you see in store for this struggle?
I mean, what we have seen recently as a pattern, I think, is people getting energized by the actions that are being taken so far and trying to take those further. And I really hope that continues to happen, and that this goes from looking like 7 people in 3 general locations and 4 distinct locations blocking construction on this pipeline to attacks along the entirety of this route and attacks on funding sources and everything that's making it possible for MVP to continue construction and to continue to think that they'll be able to profit from this pipeline. And I hope that more and more people get to experience what rebellion to this pipeline is like, because it can be really, really hard at times, but it's also liberating to confront the forces that are trying to attack us and trying to destroy so much of what people care about and depend on.
Yeah, I think that's very, very well said. Since this is kind of like the resistance to this seems to be snowballing or catching fire in some way, do you have any words for people who are facing similar situations to the one that you're in currently?
I mean, for practical things, bring more food to begin with. Don't expect things to only last a few days, and then watch them be able to continue for a month, which is, really amazing. And also, wow, we didn't expect this to happen. We didn't have any thought that this would end up this way. And I hope that for anyone in similar situations, and also everyone who I know is fighting pipelines and other destructive forces in all these other places, that we can draw strength from each other's rebellions and learn from each other and keep feeding these fires that should be happening everywhere. Because I know that whenever I see stuff popping off other places and people doing courageous and amazing things, then that makes it easier for me to stay up here and to think it's possible that we can actually get somewhere and actually make some sorts of dents and ruptures in these massive, terrifying structures of police control and state control and pipelines and hundreds of years of colonization that we're trying to confront.
Is there any support other than, hiking up and talking and having a presence, any support that you would request from anyone who's listening right now?
Definitely please contact us if you are interested in spending months living in high places.
Yeah.
It's great. There's lots of benefits. I've been able to get surprising amounts of sleep and reading and writing in, as well as directly blocking pipeline construction. But if people are interested in joining us and participating in what's going on, do please get in touch via the Facebook page or via Appalachians Against Pipelines at Proton Mail. Also, people can take actions against major funders of the project from anywhere. The major bank funders that I know of for the MVP specifically are Bank of America, PNC Bank, Wells Fargo, SunTrust, BNP Paribas, which I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing correctly, and US Bank. And someone recently did some research and found out that I think it's 7 of the biggest pipeline projects going on right now share major funders, and 8 pipeline projects have 7 banks funding them in common, and those banks are Bank of America, Bank of Tokyo, Suisse, Wells Fargo, Citibank, Royal Bank of Canada, and JP Morgan Chase.
That is all really, really good to know, and very indicative of, the late stage capitalist nightmare that we are in.
Yeah, for sure. Basically, any bank that is targeted will be funding terrible, terrible things. Those are the specific ones. Oh, and one other thing also, especially since you're based in North Carolina, MVP recently announced that they have plans that they want to expand the MVP with an additional project that's, I think, 70-mile extension that reaches into North Carolina. That probably would not start construction for years, possibly. What with the permitting process and this being a totally restarting of that process for them, because it would be a separate pipeline extension. But if people want to start thinking about and scouting those 70 miles, now is probably a good time to start.
Definitely. Thank you for that information. Nutty, those are all the questions that I have. Do you have any other further words for listeners, or anything we missed that you'd like to add?
I guess one thing that I've been thinking about and trying to find better ways to articulate is how this pipeline struggle is specifically against this pipeline and specifically against this really terrible and destructive project, but that project is linked to all of these forces that are attacking and exploiting and oppressing and killing people, because they're linked to the same structures of exploitation. And I'm talking to you from stolen land, and you're talking to me from stolen land, and we need to deal with and grapple with those histories and the upswellings of anti-colonial and anti-racist resistance that are happening everywhere and that are really powerful, and that struggles like this should be a part of and be accomplices to, and be working with against all of those forces, and not just specifically against one project.
Nutty, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me on the radio show, and thanks for, your heart and your courage and all of that, and I wish you so much good in this current struggle right now. And if there's anything else that we can do to help out, or that we can work together on, please don't hesitate to hit me up again, and we will do another thing.
Thanks so much. Yeah, and I hope that you also get to talk to the other folks in trees that are also fighting this, and I know also have really important things to share.
So I'm speaking with a couple of activists in Sonoma County, California, about the events planned for Tuesday, May 1st, 2018. Would you all please introduce yourselves for the audience?
Hey, I'm Mara Ventura, and I'm a community organizer here in Sonoma County for a labor rights organization and an immigrant rights organization.
Hi, I'm Sebastian, and I am also a community organizer with a labor organization and a immigration organization.
Can y'all talk about what organizing is going on in Sonoma County, or even just in Santa Rosa, for May Day 2018? Who's helping to organize, and what sorts of events are being planned?
Yeah, we're actually organizing a walkout for May 1st. The theme being worker struggles have no borders. And there's there's different groups organizing this, just different backgrounds. Groups like North Bay Jobs with Justice, Comite Vida, the North Bay Wobblies, the Peace and Justice Center, CAC, and Women at the Hyatt are some of the active members, and a few other folks that I might be forgetting. Do you want to add anything more to this?
I think some local labor unions as well. You mentioned the Wobblies. it sounds like folks every year do some sort of massive action where they have speakers, we have a big rally, and I think last year was a little bit different in terms of the fact that a national climate protection organization called for a climate march right before May Day, and so folks nationally decided to sort of band together, join forces, and do a more intersectional rally last year. But that same call hasn't been made around climate change this year, and so there'll be, I think, more of a focus around the livelihoods of workers and the way in which race and class and different factors intersect with the means of production and how our labor is used in this country. And I think what's exciting about this year is that last year, the workers of a local hotel in Santa Rosa, the Hyatt, decided to band together to form a union, and they've been in quite a bit of a challenge and a fight this year trying to win a first contract. So this year, the May Day rally will have an opportunity to support those workers and uplift their voices and give them a platform to talk about what the struggle has been like for them. A majority of them are women, and many of them are immigrant women.
Do you have any information about what kind of work folks are doing at the Hyatt? Like, is this workers doing specific types of labor, or is it basically like across the board non-management union type thing?
It's both. It is across the board. So it does include the front desk staff and other various important roles, the bartenders, the wait staff, and so forth. But it also is, in large part, the housekeeping that are asked to do sometimes up to 35 rooms in a day, which is just not sustainable. And as you can imagine, for folks in the community who already feel like they live in fear, to then also have a boss or a workplace that is over demanding physically on your body and emotionally as well, they do whatever they can to try and keep up with what's a completely inappropriate and unmanageable workload. So I think those are the bigger issues coming out, but there's also some really terrible work practices at the hotel around their health benefits, and they essentially change them every quarter. So they don't know every 3 to 4 months whether they're going to have health insurance for the next 4 months.
So besides that sort of insecurity and issues around the amount of work, is a part of the struggle at the Hyatt around like wage increases or wage stabilization as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's clear from the cost of living around here and the fact that so much of Sonoma County is built on this tourist industry of wine and, you know, everything that's luxurious and fun about being up here. It means that hotels can charge the same rates almost, if not more, in some places like Napa than they do down in San Francisco. And yet people doing the same work in those hotels are making the same profits, are being paid way under what the same workers are doing just an hour away down in San Francisco or Oakland. And so I think there's absolutely an issue here of equal pay for equal work. And at minimum, workers need to be making $15 an hour, but we know the actual living wage in Sonoma County is closer to $23 an hour. So there's absolutely the intersection of class and wages, and also just many of these workers being immigrant, like their experiences in Sonoma County are not just their ability to have a livable wage, but to also have a safe community. So I think, Sebastian can talk a little bit about the work that he did with a few others to do our March 5th walkout. But there's a major intersection here where now Sebastian and the organizers are moving that to also be incorporated on May Day, because so many of the workers in our labor movement who are keeping the labor movement alive are immigrant workers who are standing up and saying, we're not going to take this, we're not going to take the attacks from the Trump administration, we're not going to take the fear and the violence from ICE. And so they're involved in the rapid response in our community. They're involved in many different aspects and actions. And it was clear on March 5th, thousands of young people walked out of their high schools and their middle schools to come out and protest. And so it's clear that also the family members and the children, of many of these workers, and in some cases the workers themselves, are coming together to say, we demand, to not live in fear, to feel safe in our communities, to have ICE out, and we demand to be treated fairly in our workplaces.
Sebastian, do you have anything would you want to describe what happened on March 5th? Because I hadn't heard about those walkouts. It sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah, well, sure. As Mara stated, we organized a march and walkout on March 5th, and it was originally a response to the Trump administration's racist agenda, and starting with stopping DACA, and then it started evolving into including stuff like TPS and a few other immigration issues. Talking about all that stuff, and we decided from a general strike that it'd be better to take the walkout route and get more students involved. And we ended up getting 1,500 people to come out and join the march.
That's really awesome.
Yeah.
Immigrants carry all sorts of different kinds of jobs, right? And you've talked about how the tourism industry is a huge employer of people in the area, the hotels and such, and restaurants. Can you talk a little bit about what changes you've seen in organizing for people without documents or with DACA in recent years, just in Sonoma County?
Yeah, I can start, and then Sebastian, if you want to chime in. I just briefly, in the last year alone, it's been really exciting to see both sort of labor standing up, but also the fact that it has been led, even here in Sonoma County, by mostly immigrant workers. So last year, there's a winery, Gallo Winery, that was in a contentious fight for a while over their contract. Those are farm workers, and they won a great contract. It was a huge victory for them in that bargaining unit, those workers that bargained that contract, and they're with the United Farm Workers. And then we are actually one of the only areas in the North Bay, and also an area this large in the country even, that didn't have our waste workers organized and protected under a union contract. And so last year, there was a huge campaign where the waste workers took on a bad boss who's since left because of all of their amazing organizing work. But over 400 waste workers who drive our trucks and pick up our waste, work in the recycling sorting centers, all formed a union with an overwhelmingly 92% election victory, which is also huge and not totally heard of anymore. With so many workers. And so that was a huge victory. And on the tail end of that victory, where over 100 of them marched at 4 a.m. before work to go cast their ballots, came the first action of the Hyatt workers. And that was primarily led by immigrant women who led a march with over 60 different individuals from around the area. So there was city council members and church leaders and community folks like Jobs with Justice and North Bay Organizing Project and the Labor Council. And with about 60 or 65 of them, these housekeepers marched on their boss to let them know that they would be filing to form a union and wanted recognition, and organized a huge picket. And the night before this big picket, the boss said, okay, we don't want to fight, we'll recognize your union. So actually last year there were some major victories in terms of immigrant workers really changing the standards of what their community is getting paid right now and what working conditions should look like, but we still have a long way to go.
Well, what I've witnessed that the organizing is being led by a lot of immigrant women, working women, and it's something that's very inspiring because that's pretty much the lead. A lot of the lead organizers are these folks, and as far as and then students also have been pretty organized. And college students have been getting more involved, and organizations like Mecha and Mujeres Chingonas.
So for me, like an experience that I had growing up in Sonoma County that was really big and just, it's huge for me was in the mid 2000s on May Day. There were enormous marches around the whole country. There were the Day Without an Immigrant, as it was marketed at the time. People walked out of school. People walked out of work. People didn't spend money, like just to sort of show the impact and flexing muscles, sort of what a big part of our communities and also of the economy and the infrastructure of our cities and our communities are made up of people that don't have permanent citizenship and people who love those folks and who are in community. And you've mentioned walkouts for the first. Is that primarily just the schools, or is there sort of the same call for like a day of boycott and celebration?
It's also for a call for a day of boycott and celebration. We're just trying to build off the energy we got from the March 5th rallies, and thinking back on that, and just trying to show like what it's like if like a bunch of folks just stop working one day. The U.S. economy is based like on the immigrant work, and it would totally like give a low blow to them.
I think one thing we saw last year when there was a Day Without an Immigrant was we saw a lot of news articles the next day about a lot of people being fired for having participated in Day Without an Immigrant. And as a labor rights organization, we were concerned because I think, our media, specifically our mainstream media, tends to be more conservative. And so we felt like without really giving information about how people can walk out and boycott their workplaces legally, it gives the impression to people that they don't have those rights. And I think it's particularly dangerous for undocumented communities to see that and think that they don't have those rights, because in fact, undocumented people absolutely do have the right to strike in this country, and they exercise that right all the time, legally and safely, and win many times when they do that. So I think one thing that is really important is making sure that people have the information and know that if they're interested in walking out of their workplace, they legally absolutely have that right, but they just need to provide what's called a strike notice, which is essentially a notice that if you have some sort of organization or some sort of association that represents all of your workers, like a union or a workers association or you could form your own, then you can send one letter to your boss to let them know that folks won't be appearing in work that day. And unless you're a healthcare worker, there's no mandate on how soon you have to give that. You can, in fact, the fast food workers who have sort of notoriously led on this fight for 15 around the country, oftentimes give their notice 5 minutes before they're supposed to start their shift. But if you don't have an association of some sort to represent you, then each individual worker has to just either handwritten or typed up give a notice to your boss that says, I'm boycotting today, and to name the specific working conditions that you're fighting for, that we should have $15 an hour baseline, that we should have fair schedules and know them out ahead of time, that we should have a policy in place in our workplace that keeps ICE out. So whatever it is that you're fighting for, it can't be like it can't be like because I hate Trump. It has to be something that's tied, but everything that's political is personal, and everything that exists outside exists in our workplaces. So I think there's a lot of examples people can point to about the better working conditions or better pay or better health access to health benefits that you want at your workplace. But that's really all you have to do. But I think, we're interested in figuring out how to make sure that people know that and have support in case their bosses do try and retaliate for taking such action, which is also protected. It's concerted activity, union activity, and it's protected. But we absolutely want to see more people doing that, and we want to counteract the more conservative media that tries to sensationalize people being fired for doing what they have the right to do.
So you're organizing in Sonoma County, which is in California, which has, compared to the rest of the states in the U.S., maybe next to New York, some of the stricter or higher standards for employee rights and organizing opportunities. And just I'm mentioning this because the show gets aired in other states too. Like I'm living in the South. This is going to air in North Carolina. But are those standards and organizing practices things that are according to federal labor law, or are they things that apply to California? Okay.
These are federal laws, and they're actually very easy to read up on. We, decades ago, we passed the National Labor Relations Act, and that is the federal law that gives every worker their labor rights in this country. And so it's actually part of some of the work that we did when Sebastian and I first got together to start brainstorming, like what would, a general strike possibly look like, or what could we do with that last summer. And so it was a very easy website to navigate. And so I really encourage folks to Google the National Labor Relations Act and read what your rights are and how you can use them. And what is a strike? There's different kinds of strikes. How can you do them? And like I said, every day, workers who don't have unions, workers who don't have citizenship, all sorts of workers walk out and take strike or take action in their workplace, and they make concrete, huge improvements. And I guarantee you that whatever job you're doing, if you are not union, there is somebody who's doing the exact same job for maybe even the exact same company somewhere else with the union, who's maybe making even double what you're making and has access to health insurance and fair schedules and fair standards for promotion and all of those things.
Cool. Very helpful. So the switching gears a little bit, the fires of last fall devastated much of California, but definitely hit the city of Santa Rosa and neighboring communities very terribly. Can you all talk about the impacts on people without citizenship? I did an interview about this right after the fires, and that's definitely a blind spot that I missed. Can you talk about what happened to folks, their access to services like shelters and insurance for lost homes and vehicles, and how did the fires impact sectors employing day laborers or agricultural workers?
Yeah, I think I can talk at least about some of the immediate things that happened. At the time that the fires hit, there was, for many various reasons, very different and not all very positive experiences that the undocumented community faced trying to go to the shelters that were popping up. And, I'm not going to speak specifically to what stories were out there or maybe what our theories are around that, but just to say that the undocumented community, many of them did not feel like it was safe. And for some cases, it wasn't safe for them to be at the shelters, and it wasn't accessible in terms of, language and culturally competent places for them to be in and to bring their kids and their families. And so what unfortunately ended up happening was that there was a lot of undocumented community members that went to the coast and camped out on a Dorn beach. But as you can imagine, when you're running out of your home, fleeing or evacuating, you don't have time to grab pillows and blankets or whatever it is that you need. Many ran out without shoes or in their pajamas. Many ran out without their wallets. Documented or undocumented folks ran out like this. But particularly for the undocumented community, imagine being mid-case after several years of working to get your residency, your green card, or your citizenship, and you probably have piles of paperwork that's stored somewhere safely in your home. And so many people left not knowing if they were going to lose all of that paperwork and what that would mean for them. So they left not having identification, not having resources with them on the beach, not having access to get blankets and pillows and things to keep themselves warm. So we found out within a day, and a lot of people actually mobilized to go down, and we were able to send lots of, we sort of redirected donations coming into the shelters down to Dorn Beach. And folks met immediately with police and sheriff to make sure that nobody there was, were in fear that they would be criminalized, or worse, that ICE would come. And so actually the police, surprisingly at least, played somewhat of a not terrible role of going down and helping monitor the situation without policing the actual undocumented communities there. So that was some of sort of the immediate things that happened. But then we worked with the Great Bay Labor Center, who did actually a majority of deploying resources down there, but then also worked with them a little bit to deploy Spanish speakers to various shelters as well, to make sure that folks knew what resources they had access to at the shelters, and that someone was checking in with them, and also just sitting with them in a time of crisis, and in a time that people were really scared. And then immediately after, although the places in Sonoma County that are more heavily community who are undocumented or immigrant didn't see the fires take their homes, many of them lost electricity for days, and all the food in their fridge went bad, and they didn't have access, for plumbing and showering and all of those things. So it was a major disruption on people's livelihoods. And, for many of the undocumented farm workers, they either couldn't get to work, and it was the end of the season, so they lost out on the last couple of weeks of paychecks that they were severely depending on. But there were other stories of farm workers who unfortunately were not told. There was not enough resources out there in Spanish for the undocumented community to know that there were assistance centers set up, that workplaces were closed. And so there was unfortunately a lot of farm workers that did make it to work. And there's a lot of really concerning photos of farm workers out there without masks, and there's smoke everywhere, and they're working because that's what they have to do to survive, and because there wasn't information for them to know that they could do anything other than that. So I think just thinking about sort of some of the immediate things that were happening in the undocumented community, those were some of the more immediate things. And then there were places in Coffee Park where there were immigrant families doubled up or tripled up to a home because of our housing crisis. And so there were some homes lost, but mostly work was lost. And all of the homes that burned up in Fountain Grove were places where a lot of undocumented people worked. And so mostly what we saw were those immediate impacts, and then the long-term impacts have been people being out of work now, people being pushed out of their homes and evicted because their landlords lost their homes. And that's sort of the bigger problems we're seeing now.
Yeah, no, adding to the quick response that I noticed, being part of the undocumented community, was that folks were really there for each other and gathered up materials, offered places for folks to stay, had child care and stuff like that. And in the long term too, the word of mouth got around, and folks were talking about helping each other find other jobs. But I also have to add that I live more out in the country. I don't exactly live in Santa Rosa, but so the communities are smaller, but a lot of folks do work in Santa Rosa and in that whole area, and do have family members in Santa Rosa.
Just out of curiosity, while the majority of people who are immigrants or who are undocumented who are living in Sonoma County are Spanish speaking, there's other immigrant communities from East Asia, Southeast Asia, from East Africa. Has there been much overlap in sharing of resources or outreach in people's first languages that aren't Spanish or English in the reaction to the fires or around this Immigrant Rights Day on May 1st?
I would say it definitely happened too slow. And I say that because when you're in a time of a natural disaster, a day could be too slow. So although I will say that I think it happened within a matter of a few days or a couple weeks, I think it happened too slow from the side of the county. That information did get out, that the local assistance centers did figure out eventually how to make sure that there was people in there that spoke more than just English and also Spanish, and not even just other countries' languages, but also that we have a lot of farm workers and undocumented and immigrant folks here who neither speak English or Spanish, but they speak their indigenous languages. So I do think there was a lot of people that were concerned about it, but it was just about figuring out, and that's in that time when things are in such crisis, who was in charge of what, who could do what, who are we supposed to go to. And so I know there was a lot of folks in the county that were concerned about it and wanted to figure it out. And it was one of like a lot of things to figure out. So I think it did happen where resources went out in different languages. People mostly went through the churches. They went through different churches where we knew communities were. And we actually worked with another group that did a fire relief fund, and we did somewhat of the same thing, although our fund was specifically for undocumented communities. And as we found out, most of the other larger communities here are refugee or have some sort of papers. So I would say that probably a majority of the undocumented community are Latin American, but eventually materials went out. I just think it was clear that our county was not prepared and didn't have that plan in place ahead of time compared to other things that happened right away.
And bringing it back in some ways, it seems kind of fitting in some ways, although a shift of focus makes sense also, that the prior years did focus on climate change and the impacts that it has, because as climate chaos ramps up, it tends to affect populations like geographically placed, in hotter areas or colder areas, but also folks that are living like marginalized lives in terms of access to resources and centers of power, right?
Absolutely.
So as we lead up to Tuesday, May 1st, can you all share what May Day means to you and what you're looking forward to?
I guess, yeah, May Day means Workers' Day to me. Worker solidarity and showing like worker strength and community strength above all. And really looking forward to all the different groups that are coming out and folks that are coming out. And yeah, all that.
Yeah, I think, same thing. I think in the work that I've done doing community organizing and some student organizing and union organizing, I just really appreciate that for all of the sort of differences that we have and the things that create our political divides. When people come together around fighting for their livelihoods, fighting to make sure that we're able to put food on our table, that we have wages that are livable, that we have access to health care, that's when people really set everything aside and unite in a way I've never seen before. And so I just really get excited around May Day because I think it's an opportunity, even if you're not in a fight around your boss or a fight, some sort of specific fight, it's a time for all of us to say, but we all agree that there are certain basic human rights we're not getting in this country that we should have, or that we're not all getting equally. And so, I'm really excited about that. And I'm really excited that we're tying May Day in with an actual real workers' fight that's happening in our community.
Are there any ways that people in the listening audience, if they aren't already plugged in, that you would suggest that they plug in to get involved in? This should be airing, I think, on the 30th of April in Santa Rosa and in Bodega. But are there any last-minute ways that you would suggest for people to get involved in, not the organizing, but at least in celebrating where they are?
Yeah, and everyone who wants to be involved and wants to come out, they're invited to meet at Roseland at 2 p.m. And we'll have music and speakers till around 3:30, and then start our march down to downtown Santa Rosa.
On Sebastopol Road?
Yeah, on Sebastopol Road.
Yeah, and I would also just say to folks that are not here in Sonoma County, as Sebastian said, the March 5th, we had at minimum like 1,500, maybe closer to 2,000 folks walking out. And we actually had no idea how many people would come. We were talking like, okay, if only even like 100 come today, like we're still going to be proud of what we did. But that started because Sebastian talked to a handful of people, like from his own union or his friends. He knew that I was an organizer in town and just talked to me and just said, hey, I want to talk about doing something around, the attacks that we've been facing as immigrants, and like, can we just sit and brainstorm? And we just sat, like every week we would sit down and brainstorm, like, well, what would be our goals? What would we want to accomplish? Like, what are our concerns? What are our demands? Just very basic, like what would we want to see? And then we started to make a list of other organizations in the area, like, well, who would we talk to? It just started so small in a room for a few weeks of just 4 of us. And that room slowly grew to like 30 people over 3 months. We held a community forum. We said, let's actually bring in folks in the area to come in and give their input on what kind of action they'd want to see and what do they like about this. And we did like a mini presentation on like what is a walkout. And it was just so, it took time. We invested our time and energy after work and after school. But it came together with a very small group of us. And suddenly there was 2,000 people in the streets. So I'm not saying it happens that easily all the time, but for folks that don't know if there's a May Day thing happening in their area but are interested, just start the Sebastian way.
Yeah, thanks. And even if they're not organizing a May Day thing, organizing anything.
Mm-hmm.
As far as other resources, do y'all have resources people can look up online for the workers at the Hyatt that are organizing? Is it folks at the Vineyard Creek, the Hyatt Vineyard Creek?
I don't have anything specific. Just I would say there's a lot of great news articles about it and in local papers. So if people just type in workers at Hyatt Vineyard Creek, like suddenly like 3 news articles come up about it.
I believe there are unions from Unite here, so maybe contacting them, but I'm not too sure either.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for coordinating this, Sebastian and Mara, for all that knowledge you just dropped. I really appreciate it. And have a great May Day, y'all.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah,
Thank you again.
Too.
Thanks.
I was hoping to have a little conversation about what's going to be going on for May Day here in Asheville. Would you all care to introduce yourself and how you affiliate?
Sure. My name's Jack. I'm with the Asheville IWW, and I'm also in the Blue Ridge General Defense Committee.
And my name's Quinn. I'm also with the Asheville IWW local as well as the Blue Ridge General Defense Committee.
And y'all are helping to organize a public event for May Day for this year. Can you talk about, so far as, because we're having this conversation a little bit beforehand, what's being publicly planned and like the pinpoints of how people can affiliate with it or get involved?
So we're working with a coalition of other anti-capitalist groups to plan a rally and march in downtown Asheville. The rally is going to take place at Pritchard Park, and we'll be meeting at 4 p.m.
Well, can you talk a little bit about how May Day has been in the past in Asheville, at least in the last few years, and what y'all are hoping to make this year be, or what messages you're trying to convey, or what kind of people you're trying to get at?
Well, I've only been actively organizing in the area in the past 2 years, so I can only speak on last year's May Day, but we had a pretty decent turnout last year. There was a very brief march through downtown. We were able to meet up and talk with some folks who were walking through downtown. I think maybe the downside was that it was mostly kind of like a tourist crowd. It's really hard for most working people to get that time off.
Like outside of people that are actively politically engaged in the left, May Day doesn't have the same significance that it does among like the working population. Like there's Labor Day in the United States, and there's other ways that people celebrate, if they do celebrate an identity as someone who doesn't own the means of production, but spends most of their life working, which is usually not working. Can you talk about like building playing with culture and trying to trying to create sort of more dialogue around the identity of working?
Yeah, I think it's easy for a lot of us in the left and the radical communities to, I don't know, isolate ourselves from the broader working class in the way that we go about our organizing. I think last year's May Day, we had a lot of people coming up to us not really sure what was even going on, and it probably just looked like another kind of like communist march through Asheville. So I think we'd really like to expand May Day beyond this kind of like countercultural, like anarchist, leftist holiday, and make it more present in the broader working class consciousness, and use it to sort of build a working class identity that is centered around anti-capitalism.
There was a theme in the other conversation that we're going to be airing where people talk about organizing mostly in immigrant communities, which of course is like definitely an interlacing between immigrant identity and working class participation in the economy, working in some of the poorer paid and more dangerous and more degrading like avenues or elements of the economy. And the folks were talking about also living in an area that is highly affected by the cultural extractive nature of tourist economy. Can you all talk about maybe some of the difficulties of engaging with folks that are doing more precarious, not necessarily dangerous, but tourist-based or service-based jobs, and how difficult it could be to build conversations about the commonalities and the difficulties and the struggles that are engaged in that?
I think that if you're talking about like service workers and whatnot, yeah. So I think like especially with like tourist economies, like cities like Asheville are essentially just built on like the backs of service workers, and I think also that type of economy creates like scarcity and competitiveness in jobs. So like service workers are really terrified of just like if they lose their job at like this trendy restaurant, like for going out and marching and or like doing anything that may or not be like militant or not, they'll lose like whatever they have, and that's like their lifeline. So, and it's really difficult to get back in since it's like also a tight-knit community, so like obviously like bosses talk to each other. So I think like more or less a lot of tourist economies and tourist cities build off of that fear so that they can continually drive like people who worked there for 10 years to just be happy with like making starvation wages essentially.
So in the past, also this came up in the other conversation, in the past, like since the mid-2000s at least, immigration struggles have become a part of May Day celebrations in different parts of the country, leading to, at that point, some of the largest demonstrations across the U.S. and U.S. history, with huge amounts of people participating in general strikes to not participate in the economy, not show up for work, not show up for school, not purchase things, and just show up in public when they could to share picnics and like express community and solidarity. And that kind of ties back also to the initiation of May Day as a workers' holiday. Back in Chicago, most of the voices of people that were out in the streets, many of the presenters on the podium who were eventually threatened with death or killed by the state of Chicago were immigrants themselves. I guess, can you all talk about the confluence of immigrant struggle and working class identity and working class struggle?
Yeah, I mean it's really kind of one and the same. The immigrant struggle is part of the broader working class struggle. They exist on a more exploited level than many other members of the working class exist, and That's why it's essential to create an identity of the working class that is beyond, just typical like white blue collar workers. The working class includes immigrant workers, dishwashers, farm workers, prison workers, and in order to create a working class movement that really challenges capitalism, it's going to be essential for all parts of the working class to come together and express solidarity with those of us who are most exploited under this system.
Yeah, I think it's important as well, like in our history, like as IWW, like the first members were immigrants, and they were first like pretty prominent members as well that like had a decent amount of influence on the rest of the union. And also when bosses and or like politicians talk about immigrants and or like immigration reform, a lot of what they focus on is like the value of their labor, which I think is like good to discuss. Like, like they do provide a lot of labor, but at like what cost? Like I think a day without immigrants and focusing, like centering immigrants like on May Day is super important, because while they are workers, like they also have all these other lives to like, that you need to like uplift those parts as well and like empower, like, but these are like still people, like, and like they belong here. So like we shouldn't value them just because of what they're producing for us. Yeah.
So maybe speaking to the two members of the like non-immigrant working class that are hearing this, generally like immigrants have been like a lot of other people in the United States. Okay, so if you've got like this subjectivity of people that are competing for a job, maybe at one point it would have been primarily, or still is, white males with citizenship that have the likelihood of getting a job. Other cross sections of society are put in competition with them to like undercut wages because of, there's less enforcement of protection for these people because they're desubjectified by the state, whatever. Can you talk about, like, outside of an ethical framework of why it's ethical to support immigrant organizing and support immigrant communities, as a member of the working class who maybe doesn't suffer the same marginalizations, why is it in your interest to care about these other people that are in the community and care about their betterment?
Yeah, I think it's, well, like, on just a normal scale, like, whether they're stealing your jobs, quote unquote, they're not. Like, your boss is doing that, and your boss will do the same thing to you. One time an organizer told me, you can organize and your boss will fire you, but your boss is going to fire you either way. So, like, those struggles are affecting both you and, like, that immigrant worker as well. Like, your boss doesn't care more or less about your job, and they don't care about their job, which is, like, where your power, like, lies, is the fact that your boss doesn't care about you either way. Like, they don't care if you keep your job or if they give it to, like, an immigrant worker for, like, less money. Like, and that's, like, where you need to find that understanding that they don't care about you. So
yeah, and of course, if employers are able to get away with paying immigrant workers less and providing them harsher working, then that kind of lowers standards across the board for everyone.
So right now, Buncombe and Mitchell County and Henderson County, and actually like a lot of North Carolina and a lot of places around the country, but a lot of Western North Carolina has been sort of being ripped apart over the last week or so when we're recording this because of ICE raids, visiting people, kidnapping people on their way to work, so that people are fearing to drive their kids to school, pick their kids up from school, go buy groceries, go to work, any number of these different day-to-day things. People are living in terror of federal agents, sometimes with complicity of local enforcers, police or sheriffs. They can't live their lives in a healthy and easy manner.
do y'all have any, it's okay if you don't have like a rote answer for this, but any ideas about like how you can offer immediately working class or like solidarity to members of populations that are targeted by ICE raids and like as people who I assume have status in the United States?
Yeah, I think there's a really great potential for the labor movement to play an important role in mobilizations against ICE. I mean, there have been examples of labor unions occupying workplaces and blocking the entrance so that ICE couldn't get into workers inside. So I think that, yeah, just as documented workers, it's up to us to kind of put ourselves on the line and sort of mobilize the working class as a force that can protect non-documented workers.
I think as as documented and workers with legal status, I think that the difference between us and like immigrant workers or undocumented workers is that they are always on alert and they always know. They always act as if ICE is just around the corner and or like this stuff is going to happen immediately.
They have to.
And like they have to and like we don't, and I think we need to start adopting the idea that like tomorrow like ICE will be in town, which is what they did this weekend. Like they already showed us that like they have like power over us. So I think getting plugged in locally is probably the best bet, because I feel like a lot of those communities are really at capacity and like they need our support more than just when like ICE is in town. Like they need our support to like build networks and like spread like information to their communities, because they only have like so far of a reach. And so if we're like out there also helping, like that's like where like labor has power, because like we're all workers. So if we're pushing that more or less, I think that would be like one of the most efforts in solidarity that we can do right now, for sure.
Cool. Well, can you talk a little bit about what May Day means to you personally? Or like, what was the first May Day that y'all went to that actually you were like, holy shit, this is a thing that I care about. Like, this resonates with me. This story is awesome. Or, you know, not even necessarily the historical mythology, but just like a feeling of togetherness and energy.
I think like last May Day was the first one I like participated in, but I always knew about May Day for like a brief while, but I think it wasn't necessarily specifically like on May Day, but it was like fellow workers and like fellow WOBs like talking about it with me and like letting me know like all the history and being like, you don't understand, like our history is like very rich, and like labor history is like the like real labor history is like fucking like badass, like and the people who, there's literally like people who died for all of this. So I think like personally, I think it's good to like recognize that while like we won in certain ways, like I think there was a quote from, I don't remember, it's one of the anarchists of like Chicago that was like 8-hour day or 16-hour day, like we're all still slaves. So I think it's like good to like, for me is to build off of like, yes, like we did this and it was really great, and like we're still like building a lot of history, but we're still like kind of in this era where we're still like all slaves technically, you know. So I don't know if that like answers the question, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, workers under capitalism are so alienated from each other, so I think it's just awesome to have a day to come together and just like celebrate the people who make this society run, and celebrate how, you know, diverse and awesome, you know, the working class can be.
Like celebrate our labor. Also, I don't know if it's possible, but like I feel like we should have half like more of a militant side of May Day and then half of the rest of it kind of just be a party. If it's possible to like cast that, I don't know, those two things and make them like one, I think that's really cool. And you don't see a lot of holidays like that where people are like marching the streets and then later on like celebrating and having kind of parties. So it's kind of cool, like the different aspects of it.
Well, cool. Thank you very much.